What if the most dangerous people don't look dangerous at all? What if they look useful, helpful, connected, untouchable? And what if the real mystery isn't just what one man did, but how so many doors stayed open for him for decades? Tonight, we're not just telling a true crime story. We're tracing a blueprint, how power protects itself quietly, efficiently, until it can't anymore, and crumbles from the inside out. Quick warning, this story involves serious allegations, including exploitation and crimes involving minors. Be aware of sensitive content. Also, some of the information discussed here is alleged or still under investigation. All right, let's begin. Before we even get to Jeffrey Epstein, you need to understand the stage. Palm Beach, Florida, especially during season, has been described as a playground for the ultra-wealthy. Mansions that sit empty most of the year, then suddenly light up. Private jets landing, parties happening behind gates, staff and contractors moving like clockwork. And in places like that, there's an unwritten rule. You don't see things, not because it's hidden, but because reputations, careers, and entire lifestyles can depend on staying blind. Against that backdrop, Epstein wasn't portrayed as just another rich guy in a mansion. He was described as someone who allegedly learned how to exploit that culture of quiet. Because when an entire town runs on discretion, not asking questions becomes normal. And that's the first big idea in this story. If silence is the local language, then a predator doesn't need to scream. He just needs to whisper. Now rewind way back, because the strange part is how Epstein even got close enough to build a world like this. Jeffrey Epstein was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953. He's often described as academically focused, almost nerdy, with a serious intensity. But then something happens that still makes people do a double take. Despite not having a traditional college degree, Epstein ends up teaching math and physics at the Dalton School in Manhattan, one of the most elite private schools in the country. People still ask, how does that even happen? And here's what makes that job feel like more than a job. Dalton wasn't just a school, it was a pipeline, a place where powerful families were accessible. And Epstein, allegedly, used that environment strategically. Parent-teacher conferences weren't just meetings. They were introductions to the kind of people who can change your entire life with one phone call. He didn't just want money, he wanted proximity. And once he proved he could be useful, the next door opened. Epstein pushes into Wall Street, into Bear Stearns, a place often depicted as chaotic, money-obsessed, and brutally competitive. And the idea people repeat is this: Bear Stearns could reward outsiders if they were smart, hungry, and willing to move fast. Epstein's rise is described as part finance, part positioning. Not just I know markets, but I know people. Not just I manage money, but I solve expensive problems discreetly. He's portrayed as someone learning the gray areas of wealth management, loopholes, leverage, and the kind of legal but questionable structures that only the rich get taught. And that pattern hardens into a method. Attach yourself to powerful circles, become indispensable, be discreet, be bold. Then comes the relationship that becomes, depending on who you ask, the main power source. Epstein becomes closely connected to billionaire businessman Leslie Wexner, linked to the corporate empire behind Victoria's Secret. And in 1991, a detail still shocks people today. Wexner reportedly gives Epstein full power of attorney. That's not a casual favor, that's near total trust. And in the way this story is often told, Wexner's wealth isn't just a lot of money. It's a different class of reality. Private jets, global connections, high society, doors that don't open for regular millionaires. Epstein is portrayed as more than a money manager, allegedly involved in personal errands, social engineering, and controlling situations around Wexner's life. And the implication is huge. This connection didn't just elevate Epstein financially, it gave him credibility. It made people assume he belonged. And once someone belongs, they can recruit, invite, host, and move people around without triggering alarms. That leads into another alleged pipeline, the aspiration world. Models, actors, opportunity seekers, people chasing a dream. In some tellings of this case, the modeling ecosystem becomes a major theme, especially the idea that access to elite opportunities could be used as bait. There's an illustrative story, often repeated, about a young actress or model, sometimes referred to as Clara, who is told to contact Epstein because he supposedly has influence over Victoria's Secret casting. She meets him at Shutters on the beach in California, experiences an alleged assault, reports it, and then the response she's said to receive is basically your word against his. Whether every detail of that specific story is provable or not, it's used to reinforce the same theme. When someone is rich, connected, and protected, consequences can evaporate. And if you're thinking, okay, so how did this translate into an actual system in Palm Beach? That's where the story gets even darker. When the focus turns fully to Palm Beach, the narrative often centers on an alleged recruitment pattern built around massages. The pitch, reportedly, was simple. Easy money, quick cash. But the allegations describe a ladder structure where payments increased if boundaries were crossed, and where one girl brought another, and that second girl was pressured, subtly or directly, to bring more. One figure who appears in certain accounts is a recruiter sometimes called Wendy, described as someone who understood the payment scale, claiming she could tell what happened by how much money someone left with. The pattern being described isn't random, it's systematic, and the story repeatedly emphasizes vulnerability, that Epstein allegedly targeted underprivileged girls, those most likely to need cash, stability, or attention. There's also a contrast used to make a key point. Accounts describe investigators locating a legitimate professional massage therapist, paid a normal rate, providing normal massage work, reporting no sexual behavior, and then they contrast that with the allegation that the girls being paid differently were selected because they fit a type, young, thin, and easier to intimidate. The argument being made is basically, this wasn't a weird rich guy with a weird hobby. This was allegedly a deliberate system, with selection criteria. And once police start closing in, the story shifts into something that feels like a battle between policing and power. The Palm Beach Police Department's early investigation is often described as intense, careful, almost paranoid, because investigators believed Epstein's money and connections could crush the case if they made one mistake. One technique that stands out is something called a trash pull, working with sanitation to collect discarded items, looking for evidence, contact trails, connections, anything that could help build an airtight case. And then comes one of the most surreal images in the entire story, an alleged moment where Epstein walks into the police station and hands the police chief a $90,000 check, described as a donation for equipment, and he's reportedly accompanied by a young woman, silent, controlled, creating an atmosphere that some accounts describe as influence mixed with intimidation. It's the kind of moment that makes people stop and think, how can a suspect present himself like a civic-minded donor? While investigators are trying to build a case against him, then there are allegations of pressure tactics, private investigators staking out homes, taking pictures, attempting to intimidate or discredit victims and witnesses. And one detail that sticks with people: a victim's old MySpace page allegedly being printed out and used against her. Normal teenage behavior turned into a weapon to undermine credibility. That's why, in some victims' eyes, It felt like the system was working for Epstein, not for them. And that brings us to the outcome that still makes people furious. Accounts describe investigators identifying many victims, yet the grand jury recommendation is often portrayed as shockingly mild. Then comes the deal, a non-prosecution arrangement that, in public opinion, becomes the symbol of unequal justice. The story people repeat is this: Epstein avoids federal prosecution in that district for serious felony offenses involving underage girls. And crucially, there's the claim that co-conspirators also received immunity language, with victims not being informed before the deal was signed. That detail, if true, changes everything about how the deal is perceived. Then there's the incarceration portion, portrayed as barely punishment, a relaxed environment. Then work release that allowed him to leave for most of the day, most days. Some accounts even describe visitors continuing to come and go, suggesting Epstein's network wasn't truly cut off. So even when he was paying the price, the machine allegedly kept running. And the moment he's free again becomes a date people circle. A key date often highlighted is July 22, 2009, described as the moment Epstein is effectively free again. And the next decade is portrayed as a continuation. Travel between properties, elite socializing, returning to the private island, and, according to allegations, more victims. This era also introduces the mythology of the Little Black Book and the controversy around lists of names. There's a story that circulates about a houseman attempting to sell access to names and contacts, reinforcing the idea that Epstein's world wasn't just secretive. It was also full of people trying to profit from secrets. And during this period, one figure becomes central in the public imagination: Ghislaine Maxwell. In many victims' accounts, Maxwell is portrayed not as a passive bystander, but as an active organizer, an alleged recruiter, facilitator, and logistics manager. Some victims are described as hating her even more than Epstein, because the allegation isn't she didn't stop it, it's she helped run it. And the story frames her as the living link, the person who could answer questions like, what was organized? Who knew what? How did the system actually function? Then the story zooms out, into geography, into the most infamous place of all, Little St. James. Epstein reportedly bought Little St. James in 1998. And from that point, the island becomes a symbol, because it's the perfect setting for suspicion. Remote, guarded, controlled. Accounts describe heavy security, controlled access by boat, and an atmosphere locals interpret as something dark is happening behind closed doors. There are descriptions of the island being reshaped, vegetation scrubbed, structures added, surveillance and access control tightened. And then there's the temple-like building, one of the island's most infamous visual symbols. People point to it as proof that something unusual was happening, even though many of the wildest claims about the island remain allegations and speculation. The most recent files released show that users and conspirators might not be so far away from the truth. The names, the proximity, and why people stop trusting coincidence. Here's where the island stops being just geography and turns into a power map. Around 3.5 million archives have been made public in February, containing emails, images, videos, and other documents related to the Epstein case investigation. Between those files lies an interview. The interviewer presses Epstein on morality and asks him, in essence, whether he sees himself as the devil himself. Epstein denies being the devil, but answers with a cold, self-aware line. No, but I have a good mirror.
If we walked in, you're a mathematician. If we walked into that clinic where they're giving that money out to these people that are in the most dire straits of poverty and sickness, and told them that the money was coming from a, what are you, class 3 sexual predator?
Tier 1.
Was tier 1's the highest and worst?
No, I'm the
lowest?
I'm the lowest.
You're the lowest. Okay, tier 1, you're the lowest. But a criminal.
Yes.
That the money came from them. What percentage of people do you estimate? I understand you don't like probabilities. Do you estimate would say, I don't care, I want the money for my children?
I would say everyone said, I want the money for my children.
Did they know where the money came from?
I think if you told them, if I told them the devil,
100%.
the devil
himself.
The devil himself said, I'm going to exchange some dollars for your child's life.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
Almost every file released is redacted. The purpose of this is to protect victims' personal, identifiable information and honor. However, many videos portraying nudity were released without redaction, while many names of possible accomplices were redacted. This makes people question, who is really being protected? To this day, 519 files mention torture. Between those files, one email states, "2. Redacted, do you want me to try to do her, or just torture her on redacted?" Another email from Epstein to an alleged Harvard professor in 2014 states, "Did you torture her?" The most mentioned connection of Epstein on the internet is Donald Trump. Trump is mentioned more than 4,700 times in the Epstein files, including many victim allegations talking about sexual assault. Archival footage shows Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein together at Mar-a-Lago in the early 1990s. Epstein was even present at Trump's wedding in 1993. Another email released on the files from Epstein states, "Recall, I've told you, I have met some very bad people, none as bad as Trump, not one decent cell in his body, so yes, dangerous." And later reporting has highlighted additional photos and video, including Epstein's presence in Trump's social world during that era. Then there's Bill Gates, a connection that has been publicly acknowledged. In recent interviews, Gates said he regrets the time he spent with Epstein, while disputing some of the most explosive claims as unsent draft material. Many other connections, such as Elon Musk, Prince Andrew, and Stephen Hawking, are shown in the archives. Even though that does not prove that those people committed any crimes, it shows the access Epstein had in the world and fuels conspiracy theories. After Epstein's 2019 arrest, his death in federal custody became the accelerant for global distrust. The official ruling is suicide, but the story of that night is packed with reported failures and red flags. Guards allegedly working extreme overtime, required checks allegedly skipped, logs later alleged to be falsified, a watch system that didn't function as expected. And people ask a simple question: how does someone that high profile die unnoticed if procedures are followed? Later discussions focus on surveillance footage, the layout of the unit, and how close everything was. Some accounts emphasize how the officer's station was only feet away from Epstein's cell, arguing that sounds or movement should have been detectable. And one detail becomes infamous: a camera angle that would have provided a clear view down the hallway, described as not working at the relevant time. That's why suicide versus silenced theories exploded so fast, because the official explanation to many people collided with the environment's supposed controls. Not only that, netizens speculate that death may not have even reached Epstein at all. Comparisons between the picture taken from his body and the pictures of Epstein alive points to some contradictions. Analysis made by morticians points to inconsistencies. The question remains, is Epstein alive? So what's the real mystery? It's not only what Epstein allegedly did, it's how many systems, legal, social, financial, appeared to bend, stall, or fail while he kept moving. And even after years of revelations, the story still feels incomplete. Like we've seen the outline of a machine, but not the full list of people who kept it running. because the scariest part isn't the monster, it's the mask and the silence around it. If you want the next episode, we'll zoom in on the island's timeline, the properties and the contradictions people still can't explain without drifting into rumors as fact. Until then, stay curious and stay skeptical.